We'll now look at some additional syntax that's worth talking about when dealing with user-defined methods. So we'll first take a look at the syntax for a formal parameter list. So it looks something like this. We have a data type with an identifier, a comma with another data type and identifier, and we can just keep repeating this. We can have as many identifiers as we want. We can have just one identifier, where we would have just the data type and the identifier. We can have no parameters. We can have like 20 different parameters, just as long as we have the data type and the name of the identifier, and we separate them with commas. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say I have a method, int my method, and we pass, or we shouldn't say we pass, but we have parameters int a, comma, int b, comma, and character c. So in this case, a, b, and c would be our parameters. And notice here that we have our type, our identifier, or the name of it, and then we're separating them with commas. The syntax for method calls is pretty straightforward. We just have the name of our method, and then we have our argument list. Now the argument list is just going to be the values that we're going to pass to the parameters, and they're separated by commas. So we can do something like we call my method. So notice there's nothing that comes beforehand, and then we can just put whatever arguments we want. So if we use the same example from the previous slide, we would pass 5, a 3, and the letter A. Now I want to take a minute to look at the argument list a little bit more depth. So this would be the syntax of our argument list. So in our earlier example, we had like numbers or letters, but really it could be each value in there could be an expression or a variable. So we can have an expression or variable for the first argument, an expression or a variable for the second argument, and so forth. But similar to parameters, we need to separate them by using commas. The only difference is we don't have to have some data type with each value in here. So let's give an example. Let's say I call the my method again, except now instead of just passing like specific values, I can do expressions. So our first example here, the 3 plus 4, well, this is an argument. It's just an expression that evaluates to an integer. So we take that result and we send that to A. X here, well, this just means that we can send variables as well. We're not limited to just characters or integers. We just have a variable here, and in this case we're going to assume that x is a variable that stores an integer, because if it were some other type then this would not work at all. And then our third argument here, notice that this is a method call that returns a character. So not only can we put variables and expressions and even values in as arguments in our methods, but we can also have methods themselves be arguments to other methods as long as they return the corresponding type. So since this method does return a character, it is a valid argument for the parameter that we would have for our my method definition. So if we want to call a method, we just simply have the name of our method, the pair parentheses, and the arguments that we need to pass to the parameters. Now, there are two important things that we need to keep in mind when we're dealing with parameters and arguments. So the first thing to keep in mind is that the number of arguments must be the same as the number of parameters. So for example, if our method has 3 parameters, then our method call needs to have 3 arguments. If the number of arguments and parameters don't match, then we're going to get a compile error. We can't send 2 values as arguments if the method is expecting 3. The second thing is that the types of the corresponding parameter and argument must match. So let me give you an example. Let's say I have my method with int a, double b, and character c. If I try to call my method with 3.5, 6, and hello, this isn't going to work, because the first argument must be an integer, because our parameter a is an int, so our first argument must be an integer. Our second argument needs to be a double because b is a double. The third argument must be a character because c is a character. So what happens is if I'm going to take this 3.5 and I'm going to try to store it in a, I'm going to take this 6 and I'm going to try to store it in B. I'm going to take this hello and I'm going to try to store it in C. But if the data types don't match, that's not going to work. That's like just in our normal code trying to store 3.5 in an A, which is an integer. We're not allowed to do that. So we have to make sure that the types have, match as well. And finally, as I've said before, it is possible that we have a method that just doesn't take any parameters at all. We still need the parentheses because that's how Java distinguishes between a method name and a variable name. So if we forget to include the parentheses, Java's going to think that we're dealing with a variable. So for example, I can do public int my method. I have my parentheses, but there are no arguments. So this is a perfectly valid method.